Pikes Peak. Or Pueblo, sorry.
Oh, yeah.
I was angled too much, I thought.
So a couple things. We finally opened one of 6 new roundabouts that are in Pueblo. We're pretty excited about that. The I-25 and US 50 interchange, they're hoping to make an award at the end of this week or next week. And probably looking for construction to end of 2026 or early 27. Also CDOT's making some really good headway on our off-ramp for City Center Drive and I-25. That's kind of our main corridor for people coming down to our downtown. So they're definitely beautifying that a lot better than it was before. So we thank CDOT for that. That's it.
Dr. Cog.
Thank you. Our board met on September 18th. We passed updates to our non-discriminatory program, specifically to include Title VI, limited English proficiency plan, ADA progress program plan, and then the ADA program access plan, and then the disadvantaged business enterprise program. During that time, we also made updates and amended our TIP in order to accommodate or add some grant funds for East Colfax BRT, as well as the connecting communities for the Globeville, Laria, Swansea areas. We did get an update from CDOT on the BRT along Federal Boulevard, as well as receive an update from Front Range Passenger Rail. That's it. Wait, there's another.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Odorizio, Mr. Chair. Just a quick announcement for those folks around the table that have been involved with Dr. Cog for a long time. Our own Steve Cook is retiring at the end of this week after a 28-year career at Dr. Cog. I know many of you have had a chance to work with him in one capacity or another over his career, but we just really appreciate his service to the state and the region and the work that he has done on behalf of our partners at Dr. Cog. So thank you, Steve.
Denison Valley.
Okay. One of the things that we've been working on for a number of years, 4 years, I think now, was Little Blue Creek Canyon. And it was big to do in the area because we were going to be shutting it down basically to improve Highway 50. However, the community put up such a roar that we were able to do alternate lanes and stuff like that, and waiting periods for when they were doing blasting and stuff like that. So that is complete. And so we're moving along, but soon as that was complete, the bridges went out. And so, we've had a hard time. And the bridges are only like 2 miles from where Little Blue Creek was. And so Highway 50 has been closed for 4 years, now going on 5, with alternate traffic going here and there. And so it's been difficulty. Now, I gave a little report of Highway 50 that they talked about at the commission meeting. But one of the things that Highway 50 has been doing is providing weekly updates on where they are with that. So CDOT has been really, really, really involved in communicating with the public on what's happening, where it stands, how we can get moving traffic along and stuff like that. And they've gone and bent over backwards in a number of different emergency situations to allow certain vehicles over the bridge when they weren't supposed to. But they got everything all squared away, and so make sure everything was safe and allow these particular things to go over. So Highway 50 is moving along, and they think they're going to be done mid-November or something like that. So we had our TPR #1 meeting, and so that went over pretty good, except it lasted too long for us, and we were caught unawares that the meetings are going to be longer than we originally thought. And so we're going to be moving on to our meeting #2, scheduled for June 14th. Okay, now, one of the things we discovered and we knew all along is our MMOF projects and selections and call for projects really needs some work in terms of how we call for projects, how the projects are evaluated, how they're scored, and this type of thing. So we're having a special meeting on October 17th, just to discuss MMOF and the procedures that are going to be necessary to avoid any conflicts and misconceptions about how the projects are going to be evaluated. So that'll happen. And so we're just moving along. A couple of the major projects are complete. And so we're moving on to deciding which ones are going to take priority as we move into the new planning process.
South Central.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you. Luis Lopez, Los Alamos County Commissioner and longtime South Central TPR alternate for this organization. We did have the CDOT 4P meeting on the 25th in Trinidad at our Los Alamos County chambers. It was well attended. I was so thankful to see the city of Trinidad attending those meetings. And a big thank you to Shane, Jeff, Lindsay, Jennifer. I'm going to forget the rest of their names for CDOT, for the staff organizing that, for coming down and giving that great instruction and information to our community down south and the projects that are moving forward and what the future looks like for Los Alamos and Huerfano County. On the 24th, we will have our regular TPR meeting. I look forward to seeing you all again at that and for our South Central region and Region 2. Moving forward with the TPR bill, tomorrow CCI Legislative Steering Committees will be having a meeting. And at the last meeting we had regarding that, it looks very strong that it might be supported during our straw poll. Having more members available on tomorrow's meeting will give us a definite whether or not this will be a priority bill for CCI moving forward with our TPR boundary extensions to the Intermountain community. So we look forward to having that meeting with CCI and getting that accomplished tomorrow. And moving forward, I will be termed out as a county commissioner. And I ask for you all to continue your great support for Mr. Blasey. Traditionally, our South Central Council of Governments Director has been the STAC representative for many years with an alternate of a county commissioner. And hopefully the future county commissioner, whoever is elected, receives the same support from you all. So thank you all for your support for all these years for Los Alamos County and Huerfano. And I will not be leaving you completely out. I will stay on with the Front Range Passenger Rail. And that's why I'll be leaving you a little early today. We do have an executive committee meeting for the finance meeting this afternoon that I'll have to be leaving a little early today. So thank you for all your support.
Northwest.
So Brian and I are going to split east-west because that's how we roll. I'm going to go west first. First of all, we have our next TPR meeting on Thursday of next week. Part of that agenda is discussing, nominating chair and vice chair for that election. And then we will be diving into our second planning meeting, as well as having a very wonderful conversation around US 40 corridor, which is our main corridor safety. We've received some good information regarding how, when, why accidents occur on 40, especially in the bedroom communities going to Steamboat and Winter Park respectively. So that'll be a very interesting meeting. Now in the western part, we are working on the passing lane from on 40 from Kremling over to Muddy Pass. That is looking really good. There's some buttoning up projects down south in Hamilton area as far as paving, and then improvements on Colorado 13. I am going to stress, and I believe that my partner in crime here will carry that torch for Northwestern Colorado and pretty much all rural Colorado. The wonderful word of resiliency. We had the perfect storm 3 weeks ago on US 40. Glenwood Canyon shut down again. And wait for it, the same day, I should show you the pictures. I wish you could put it up. We had the biggest rock slide on Wolf Creek Canyon. So 40 shut the whole thing down, and wait for it, everybody gets rerouted on 40, even though we all seem to think Cottonwood Pass is the solution. And we ended up having to have the reroute go through our county roads. The beauty of this is our county roads aren't in great shape. And wait for it, we don't get reimbursed by CDOT when huge freight people come through and drive on our county roads when the perfect storm happens. Now, do I believe that this will happen again? Yes. Frequency, who knows? But what I'm trying to convey to probably the new chair for our TPR is resiliency is huge. And US 40 is the corridor when Glenwood shuts down. And it's not an if, it is when. So we all need to continue to think about resiliency patterns in the mountain corridors. The problem is we don't have money. CDOT doesn't give a lot of money, and we aren't high on the totem pole of grant funding for US 40 money. And I can't stress enough in my parting words, we really need to consider the highways that are actually used year round and not the ones that are used seasonally. Brian, west or go east.
Thanks, Heather. Just a few things in the Northwest TPR eastern side. We're in design phase for Red Dirt Hill and the Highway 40 expansion project through the towns of Winter Park and Fraser. I've also requested a speed study done for the town of Fraser, get the speed reduced through town. It's a little quick. I would love to bring up the idea of having a ballot issue for a gas tax again. It's something that was on the ballot, 10 years ago and didn't pass. And we haven't done anything to help funding with CDOT since then. So I'd love to have the STAC kind of help get the ball rolling on that so that more funding can be available for our roads. Unfortunately, I have to leave at 10 today. So at the break, I have to catch a flight. But I wanted to say thanks to Vince and Heather for all the work that you've put in over these years. And congratulations to Gary and Holly. Thanks.
Okay, Upper Front Range.
All right, so we met on September 5th in Fort Morgan for our Morgan County meeting. And our transportation commissioner for our region, I think everybody is aware, Jim Kelly is retiring or gave his resignation as part of his position. So I don't know where CDOT's at with accepting applications or the governor with accepting applications on what that's going to look like, but we'll have a new transportation commissioner for our region. We also did our MMOF essentially call for projects, and we are on that one. Actually, our draft applications are due today. The TPR did decide we are combining years 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, so that we can get to $1.4 million for a call for projects. So I think it's more of the opinion of you need at least $1 million to do a good project, especially if, even though these are state funds, we still treat them somewhat like federal dollars. And so that increased our prices approximately 30%. So we need to get to an amount that is reasonable for people to want to apply for projects. So that call opened up and draft applications are due today. And we're going to try and have our final applications due in November so that by the time we get to our next quarterly meeting in December, we can have an executive committee meeting and be able to review those applications for award. So we're excited about getting that process completed. We also had a presentation previously from regarding the, I don't know how hearing studies that are occurring by the Colorado Water Conservation Board, but it's going to affect all of our counties essentially for what we're going to have to look to adopt. So the Upper Front Range did put a letter together for CWCB regarding what we call BLE, the base level engineering technical position. that the state's taking. So it's just something to be aware of, because if these do become regulatory, then you will be even more restrictive than FEMA on what you're going to have to put in for infrastructure. I know it's going to affect CDOT's infrastructure, it'll affect county infrastructure. So it's just something to be aware of. We also, CDOT's making improvements to our I-76 eastbound off-ramp at County Road 49, which is our county highway. We're having a lot of traffic issues queuing underneath the highway. And so they're helping make four-way stops for us to help assist with the safety in that location. And then Marissa was there to help do our 2050 presentation for the RTP. So we look forward to continuing that process and having those discussions. And hopefully we hear this month on MPDG. And if we were successful in getting a rural surface transportation grant for I-76 and County Road 8. And that's all I have.
Grand Valley.
All right, so we did not have a board meeting this month or last month, but we are finished, or we just finished the public outreach for our Mesa County Safety Action Plan and also our first round for our long range plan. We're finishing up our safety action plan, and through the month of November, we'll be going to all of our local jurisdiction boards to adopt that plan. We really want to have like a commitment across our valley towards safety. We had another pedestrian fatality last night. It seems like we're having them weekly now, as well as those 2 CDOT employees. So really looking forward to starting to implement some of the outcomes of that plan to try to make a difference through Mesa County. For our long range plan, we're kind of starting to get into the greenhouse gas evaluation. So maneuvering that challenge. And we will be delaying our call for projects for MMOF until after we're done with that. Similarly, our amount is not very much, but with our mitigation action plan, I think we need any multimodal funds we can scurry up to to address that. On the transit side, I like to give a little update on that since we're so closely involved, but we just signed our new operations contract. Our prices went up 20% from this year's, which had some increase for wages. So the cost of running transit is increasing, I think, pretty significantly, and it's something good to keep in mind. Making some progress on our maintenance facility, and also we received for short cutaways recently. So it seems like buses are actually arriving, which is encouraging. Yeah, I think that's all I have for Grand Valley. Thank you.
Okay, we'll go online, Central Front Range.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's Dick Elsner. First, I want to thank Heather for her service and also for all of her work and noise that she makes on resiliency and trying to figure out how to provide a way to get people moving when parts of the system are closed that doesn't involve county roads, which are always, at least in my case, always substandard at best. Dirt track it normally. So anyway, thank you, Heather, for all of that. Our next meeting is coming up, so we haven't had one since the last STAC meeting. I'd like to let everybody know that there are absolutely no leaves left on any tree out to 85. Please tell everybody don't travel to 85. We had a 16-mile backup going up into the mountains the other day and a 22-mile backup coming out of the mountains the other day because everybody wanted to look at the leaves. I want to thank CDOT and the contractor. They're moving along on the Fairplay interchange. Fortunately, we've had some really nice weather. I think they might get it done before it gets really nasty. They're hopefully in the stage of paving that in the next week, and we'll be able to say that everything else can be done during the winter. They have finished or are in the process of finishing all of the electronics for the chain-up station this side of Kenosha. So that's going to be a big deal and really nice. And they're also putting in a new speed limit sign that I'm assuming will be connected to some system where they can set the speed limit sign based on road conditions. My only concern is if you only put one on a road that's got about 10 speed limit signs with 4 speed limit changes along the way, when they see that and it says, hey, it's really slick, go slow, and then they see the next one that says, hey, it's not so slick, it's 65, even though the conditions haven't changed. I'm not too sure how that's going to work. I think you're going to have to put up a whole lot more signs.
And with that, I want to thank you.
North Front Range. Anybody on?
Yes, hi, John Mallow again, current chair of the North Front Range MPO. Two things to mention. First of which is September 5th meeting, the Planning Council approved a 2025 Vango fare increase as well as an update to the fiscal year 2022 program of projects for transport. This update was due to increased funding from the IIJA BIL. At the September 19th Transportation Commission meeting, North Front Range MPO Executive Committee submitted a joint letter with the Upper Front Range Transportation Planning Region recommending the TC consider the importance of targeted capacity projects in rapidly growing regions in PD 14. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Southeast, are you on?
Surface treatment and bridge projects around the region that we've had progress over the summer are now wrapping up. Projects that have been advertised that will begin construction in the spring. We have our next TPR meeting on October 23rd, starting at 9 a.m. to 12. Our update to the website is complete for accessibility, and we're starting to add historical documents, planning documents, minutes, and all add meeting no notices to encourage public involvement in our TPRs. Thank you.
Southern Ute. Okay, don't see anybody. Ute Mountain. Don't see them on either, so I think that concludes our no, I need to get mine. We had our TPR meeting for Eastern on September 9th. Majority of it was going over multimodal option funds, our bylaws, and within our regional planning kickoff for that. One of the pieces of information we requested to have for our reviews as we work through the plan was to get more VMT data so that we can try to help prioritize which routes we need to try to address first for maintenance and preservation is our top priority for most of our roads. Other than that, we did have one project in Hugo that is still trying to work through the multimodal option fund requirements. They've been having to keep going back and been wrangling, trying to just get some sidewalks built in a small town. They were even going to have traffic control and things for areas that never have had traffic control. There's no stop signs. I mean, it's small town just trying to get sidewalks improved. And so we still need to try to streamline that process for small communities that just all the extra requirements are going to almost eat up all the funding, and then they won't have money to actually build the sidewalks. So it's something we still need to work through on that process for the really small communities that just don't have the infrastructure and the staff and things to do these multi-million-dollar projects or million-dollar projects because of the requirements that the state's trying to put on these projects that are supposed to help multimodal statewide and small communities also. So with that, don't have anything else. So federal highway. Or I guess I should check mine. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Couple things. We're in the new fiscal year here after October 1. So as is traditional, we're operating on a continuing resolution, but should be seamless. And if you've got projects that are ready to obligate some funds, shouldn't be a problem. So things should be seamless on that front. I do want to mention, I guess, safety a little bit. And there's so many things that we can do at different levels to address safety in our state here. Our fatalities are, for this year, is looking, we're going to be maybe slightly less than last year, but we're still at a very, very high plateau. And we have so many pedestrian accidents, fatalities, motorcycles, you read these reports, it's just one after another. And so there's so many things we can tackle. And I guess the other fact that maybe the most germane here is that around 40% of those are off the state system. So they're on local roads. They're not under CDOT jurisdiction. They're under local governments. So it's something to keep in the forefront as we advance projects. And for assistance or looking for ways to get some support on that, a couple things. One is the Colorado LTAP Center, and they can provide training for technical for your staffs and for others to understand some of the safety principles. There's something called proven safety countermeasures that are techniques you can use. They're proven. They're things you can do they're tested and tried that can reduce fatalities and injury accidents. So if you're not familiar with those, if your public works folks aren't, please get in touch with Colorado LTAP or by office, and we'd be more than happy to point you in the right direction on that. I do want to recognize Grand Valley and the safety symposium they had, it was about a month ago. Very well done, and a chance to kind of focus on the safety concerns in that area. And so there's money available. There's the Safe Streets for All program in the Federal Highway. Under the planning funds there, there's a lot of money available, and it's I don't want to say it's non-competitive, but it's readily competitive, and it's something that nearly all those applications get approved. So if you're thinking about doing something to raise awareness for safety in your area, think about that. Again, get in touch with myself or Bill, and we can certainly give you some more details on that. And maybe you can take advantage of that. There also is funding there for implementation. That's much more competitive, but again, it's an option. It's something out there. If you've done a study and you come across with something that would really make a difference in your community, it's a chance to take a shot at it and get that funding. And I guess the last thing I would say about that is don't lowball that because you're not going to get more money. If you apply for 4 million and it's going to cost 7, you're going to have to find that other 3. And if the cost goes up to 8, you're still going to have to find that extra. So don't be afraid to be realistic, or even give yourself maybe a slight cushion on the amount of money you put in for those things. But again, think about safety as you go about your business. And if there's things that we can do, you're looking for some assistance, please let us know. We'd be happy to help, because I think we got to keep that in the forefront. The numbers are just way too high, and we gotta address that. So thank you.
FTA. Yep. Anybody on?
Yes, Emma Belmont with FTA's on. The only thing I'll add is on September 27th, FTA published 4 new circulars that reflect 2 CFR 200 regulatory changes that happened in early 2024. So if you do receive FTA grants, just want to make you aware of that. Those circulars become effective on November 1st. So just a heads up. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, legislative report. Yeah.
Do you want me to kick it off,
Yes.
Jamie?
Hold on
Okay,
just a second,
just a
Emily.
Hang on a minute. One of the other things I forgot on the bus trip is on the bus trip out. We were driving on I-70 going west when everybody started to see a big semi going east. But the semi was bouncing off the guardrail, and there didn't appear to be a driver. And so, and it was still moving, not if real fast, but it was still moving. And so our guides notified CDOT, and CDOT employees were able to stop the truck, and the guy was suffering from seizures. And so the thing of it is, that was coincidental to a certain extent, because just the week before, a semi went out of control. And so nobody was hurt on this one, but it could have been. So big trucks moving fast are really dangerous. And that's why we have a lot of runaway ramps. And so we were able to see something that was happening right in front, well, right on beside us. So thanks.
Saved our lives, many others.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Who's Emily?
Great.
Have you go.
Hi, everyone, and welcome, Chair Beatty. Glad to have you. So we are about a little over 3 months away from session starting up, so things are starting to get exciting. But next month, I think I'll have a better sense of if we'll be running any proactive or advocating for any proactive bills next year. A lot of those discussions are caught up in the budget process, and the governor's proposed budget will get introduced on November 1st. So next month we'll have a better sense of that. We also will, so I can give a presentation on that, as well as other proposals that we're seeking. Like every year, we're required to present a proposal to the Capital Development Committee. And so I think we're looking at an Araba rest area funding proposal. So there's a few elements there that I'm excited to chat with you all on. And then in the meantime, we've also been tracking the work of the Transportation Legislative Review Committee. They just concluded their third meeting last week, where they voted on which bills they'll be introducing next session as their committee bills. They did draft 6 bills and had the opportunity to choose 5 of those to run next year. And so they cover a wide variety of different topics. I'll go through each of them. So, and I'll save the one that I think you're most interested in for last. So first bill I'll talk about is Motor Vehicle Regulation Administration. So it makes various changes to policy on motor vehicle registration and state identification credentials, and also establishes vehicular document piracy as a new civil infraction. There's a bill called Local Funding for Vulnerable Road User Protection. It's kind of a 2.0 version of a bill we saw last year that created a vulnerable road user enterprise under CDOT. This one does not create a new enterprise, but what it does is authorizes local governments to impose vehicle registration fees themselves to fund vulnerable road user protection strategies. The third bill is Railroad Investigative Report Confidentiality. So that bill repeals the confidentiality requirement for investigative reports of railroads that are conducted by the PUC. And then there is a bill called Paratransit Services. The bill imposes new duties on entities providing paratransit services in the state, and also creates a paratransit task force that CDOT would administer. And then the final bill is called Increased Transportation Mode Choice to reduce emissions. So that lays out a process for CDOT, MPOs, and larger transit agencies to set mode shift goals. So essentially, CDOT would undertake a mode shift assessment and make recommendations for mode shift goals, and then undertake a rulemaking to set those goals. It would apply to CDOT, metropolitan planning organizations, transit providers that provide transit to a population of 100,000 people or more, and local governments with populations of 25,000 or more that are within an MPO. And so I think there's a lot more to work out on that bill. We're excited about the initial draft. That is a bill that Senator Winter is championing. So excited to have a discussion about what else we need to fit into that bill to continue to refine it. And so that bill will get introduced probably early next year in January, and then still needs to go through, as all of these bills do, go through the actual process of going through both chambers and getting signed by the governor. And so all of these bills have a lot of opportunities for amendments still, but it was a very lively TLRC with a lot of big bills. So happy to answer any questions. And that's pretty much the bulk of my update. Thanks so much.
Emily, just a quick question. This is Elizabeth Upper for Range. On the paratransit services bill, is CDOT not doing that as part of your statewide transit plan evaluation? How is this? Why is a separate bill being pulled out of what you guys would be looking at from a CDOT perspective?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll have to chat a little bit more with GTR about if there is any pieces in there. I think there might be some room for some synergies there, but I know that there has been a push for a separate paratransit task force and work to particularly focus on the issues facing paratransit. I think in particular for RTD, but also for a statewide focus. And so I think there's more to come on that, but that's a great flag, and I'll chat with Kay on that.
Any other questions for Emily? Seeing none. Okay, Jamie.
Good morning, everybody. Happy October, and I'm so glad to hear that there aren't any leaves left, Commissioner Elzer. So I just want to let you know the days on October 3rd are sort of the holidays for October 3rd are somewhat lame. It's Mean Girls Day, which is a nod to the movie, not a celebration of bullies. It is also National Boyfriend Day. So if you have one of those, please let them know you appreciate them. I suspect that doesn't apply to many of us in this room. So the exciting holiday coming up, tomorrow is National Cinnamon Roll Day. So get prepared. And please send me any pictures of any cinnamon rolls you partake in to celebrate tomorrow. So for my actual job, the exciting thing is the House and the Senate passed a continuing resolution, which meant we averted a government shutdown right before an election. I think everyone is happy to have avoided that. It largely extends agency spending through at current levels through December 20th, 24, which means there is going to be a contentious situation right before the holidays. So that either could work in favor of getting something quickly or, a government shutdown 5 days before the holidays. Who doesn't love that? The House and Senate votes were fairly overwhelming, 341 to 82 in the House and 78 to 18 in the Senate. The House had tried a 6-month extension to get us through to next year, but there was a lot of pushback from the Speaker's party as well as the other party. Congress is now on a 6-week recess until after the election. So I don't know if you guys heard we have an election coming up, but we're 32 days, 14 hours, 14 minutes, and 11 seconds away from the election. So next time I see you folks, we'll have a whole new world. So yeah, let's stay tuned and we'll see what happens in November and then we'll see what happens in December. So happy Cinnamon Roll Day.
Chair Beatty, I have a question.
Yeah.
So on the, Jamie, on the continuing resolution, did that also increase the debt ceiling limit? Do you know?
No,
it did not.
It did not. No, that's
So-
going to be a separate fight. I think that got pushed to like February. I'll have to double check, but no.
Yeah, so
We
this
get to
is,
fight about that too.
I would encourage everybody to reach out to your congressman and state that that needs to be done before they go on Christmas holiday. So our Colorado Springs Chamber of Commerce went back to Washington DC and they gave us an interesting fact. The debt ceiling limit expires on January 1. The new Congress is not sworn in until January 3rd. And there's a lot of new congressmen, including ours down in Colorado Springs, who will have to come in and immediately start and figure out a debt ceiling limit bill without any staff, because congressmen have to work. But if there's no money to pay the staff can either volunteer or just stay home. And I've worked for a new congressman before. It's not the easiest thing, but I think that they really need to just consider. The Treasury Department has some exceptional circumstances where they could raise the debt ceiling limit for a few weeks. I think it would just be better for this current Congress to extend it till the end of February so that our new Congress can get going and get working. And so that's just my suggestion for the day. And I'm just letting my staff know that today is Mean Girls Day.
He asked me what
Not
day
the
it
movie.
was in math.
Okay. Any other questions? Legislative. See none? We'll take a break and be back at 10:05. We'll just stay right on our agenda schedule. If everybody could take your seats so we can get started. Adventurous. All right, I think we're ready to get started with our strategic highway safety plan update. Melody.
Hello, good morning. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm here to provide an update on the 2025 Strategic Highway Safety Plan, which is being updated this year. Some of you will have heard from my colleague Gabby, who presented at the previous STAC meeting with an introduction. So I'm going to go quickly through the introduction and then move to some updates on progress. So what is the Strategic Highway Safety Plan? It is defined by the Federal Highway Administration as a statewide coordinated safety plan that provides a comprehensive framework for reducing fatalities and serious injuries on public roads. So I really want to emphasize just a couple of words in this definition. One is statewide coordinated. We really are working on collaborating with a lot of our local partners and other state agencies and making sure that this is a statewide and well-coordinated plan. I also want to emphasize the words comprehensive framework on here because really we're looking at all different types of strategies to reduce fatalities and serious injuries. The requirements of the Strategic Highway Safety Plan is that a state identifies its key safety needs in order to guide investment decisions towards those strategies and countermeasures with the highest potential to save lives and prevent injuries. So I just want to emphasize here the identifying key safety needs. That's been the major step that we are working on currently. So the vision of the Strategic Highway Safety Plan is a future Colorado with 0 deaths and serious injuries. So all people using any transportation mode arrive at their destination safely. And our mission, how we're going to get there, is that Colorado agencies and partners cooperatively implement strategies that eliminate transportation system fatalities and serious injuries. And really that cooperative piece is essential. And it's essential that we work together between industries as well, between engineering, enforcement, education, evaluation. We really all need to partner together from the state level, our federal partners and our local partners to cooperatively implement these strategies. So that's as much introduction as I'm going to do. If you have more questions on that, please feel free to ask me those questions. But what we have done lately is this is our hybrid workshops. So you'll see some pictures there. We had some great discussion in those. There were approximately 125 in-person and virtual attendees at our hybrid sessions. And we got some great feedback on what are those key safety needs that we're hearing from our partners. So the purpose of the workshops was to influence the strategies and initiatives that shape Colorado's transportation safety, to assess the current state of safety in Colorado and understanding what is and isn't working, provide a platform for collaboration and engagement between all of us at the state and our local communities and our community members who are dedicated to improving road safety. Also to discuss and identify potential funding sources and gather insights about community safety perspective, needs, and challenges. So we did a word cloud exercise in our hybrid workshops asking, what is your #1 safety concern? And these are a handful of the resulting word clouds. And you'll see there's a lot of behavioral concerns on here. Speeding, distraction, impairment were some of our top concerns, but also there are a lot of varied concerns that our different partners had, from vulnerable roadway users, road design, as well as a lot of concern about speeding and impairment. Some of the top themes from our discussion was safety as a priority. And in this one, it's really, we're looking at our safety culture as well as how we prioritize safety and how it shows through in whether safety is a priority for Colorado, and making sure that that shows through. Enhanced drivers education programs, that was a top concern as well, that we need better driver's education for our new drivers. Increased funding for safety improvements and grant navigation support in order to access that funding, as well as comprehensive educational campaigns. As I mentioned earlier, it's really essential that we partner with those other industries, enforcement and education as well, to make sure that we are putting the message out there about how important safety is. And expansion of partnerships. Really, we all have to work together, break down those silos in order to all work together for safety in Colorado. So here's a look at the engagement that we've done so far. We had a virtual kickoff in August with 147 participants who wanted to hear about the Strategic Highway Safety Plan. We also held 5 hybrid workshops, and those who had 125 participants combined with who was in person and virtual. And then we've held 4 virtual workshops so far. We do have 1 more coming up, and we've had about 70 participants so far in those workshops. So we've had a lot of feedback from a lot of varied participants, from local agencies to other advocacy groups, other state agencies. We've had a lot of varied perspectives at all of those workshops, and we're really excited to bring all that together to get prepared for our next round. We've also presented at various task forces, committees, and boards, and you'll see a couple listed there that we have been partnering with in order to advance safety in those spaces. We've also attended a number of events and conferences and talked about the Strategic Highway Safety Plan and what we're doing here in Colorado, and how you can participate. Our next upcoming item, we do have 1 more virtual workshop, and then we're going to be jumping into subject matter expert meetings. We're going to have our first round in the first week of October, next week, and we're going to meet with experts in these 4 categories, and we're really going to drill down on some of those ideas and themes that we pulled from the hybrid and virtual workshops. And through multiple rounds of subject matter expert meetings, we're going to really dive in and develop those strategies. So here's the steps and process, and I think any of you who were at the previous STAC and saw Gabby's presentation have seen this, but we are here in step 2, which is that stakeholder engagement step combined with our technical analysis, and we're moving into that countermeasure development. After we have our draft countermeasures, then we'll be creating the draft of the plan with the final plan in April of 2025. So just a recap of some of the next steps, we have our subject matter expert meetings coming up. We do have 1 more virtual workshop, and that's not here on the slide, but we have 1 more of those. We are still collecting feedback through our project email address here and the online platform, which you can access through that link if you'd like to see what some of the comments are, or if you have your phone, you can scan that QR code. That's all I have for today. So I know it was a quick run through, just a quick update. Any questions?
Ron.
Melody, thank you so much for the update. Really appreciate it, and very supportive of the work. And I know Dr. Cox's staff's been involved in engaging with CDOT in the context of this work and our regional Vision Zero plan. So I really appreciate the work. I'm curious about sort of, since this becomes sort of an investment strategy or guidance, if you will, for sort of the use of HSIP funds in particular, which I think to John Cater's point earlier in the meeting, a significant amount of fatal and serious injury crashes occur off the CDOT system. My understanding is HSIP funds are available for all facilities, not just state highway facilities. And I think one thing that our local governments sometimes struggle with is how to bring forward or how to participate in the allocation of HSIP funds to address the highest priority safety needs, not just those on the state highway system. Can you talk a little bit about that and how this plan works into that strategy?
Yeah, so with this plan, we're hoping to identify high-level strategies and those systemic type things. So like this type of project will improve safety. And in doing so, allowing there to be more room for different types of projects to then qualify for the HSIP. Did that answer your question?
I think, thanks, Melody. So I guess what I'm hearing is that once this is completed, there will be more of a process to perhaps engage with the TPRs and local governments throughout the state to identify under this framework how to compete for, how to bring forward project ideas to access HSIP funds across the state, not just on the state highway system.
So I can't say specifically that there's going to be a specific time, I guess, for there to be that I guess application of those funds. So I can't say specifically, but that is the general idea.
I feel terrible. Okay. I'm curious because CDOT has a strategic transportation safety plan or has in a lot. That's where essentially we identified the project list. So does this plan replace that plan?
Yes.
Essentially, and this is basically CDOT's version of SS4A that the communities are doing essentially. So if all the communities are doing their own SS4A plans and their planning efforts for reducing fatalities, how are you looking at that from a statewide perspective and incorporating those SS4A plans that everybody else is doing?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So this plan is statewide. So with the SS4As, I know they're very specific about what types or what specific projects are going to be improving that safety. And this plan doesn't have a project list like that. So it's really going to be more of that high level types of solutions. Yes.
Eva.
So with your findings, a lot of it, coming from Pueblo, and I attended both, they were really great, informative. So thank you. A lot of discussion was about education campaigns. And then I know in our youth, 70% of our fatalities for youth are in vehicles. So on those findings, are we hoping that maybe more funding will go towards that? Or, with those goals that you're identifying, is there hope that there might be some sort of more funding, or what can we expect out of that?
Yeah, so that is the hope. While this plan is directly tied to the HSIP funding, we're hoping that it helps guide other safety funding as well. And so that we can point to this plan and say, okay, well, this is one of our top priorities, and we can look at that for other potential funding sources as well. And we are working closely with the Department of Revenue and with our triennial safety plan, which is focused on those behavioral and education type funding sources through NHTSA. So we're really wanting this to be a coordinated plan between those different agencies and be able to be more than just this is for HSIP funding, but say these are our safety priorities in the state, and help use that to hopefully get more different funding sources.
Yeah,
Just a quick question. With regard to distribution of the funds, I assume it's only regional competition then? Or is it statewide? Are there different pots of money, or is the money going to be distributed through the regions?
That's a good question, and I actually don't know the answer to that, but I can certainly get back to you.
Yeah.
If I could, the faster safety allocation was passed by the Transportation Commission and approved by STAC a couple of months ago. So that allocation from a statewide perspective has already been done. And I think I may have to phone a friend over to I think those allocation numbers, have they went out yet by region?
Current fiscal year for the current fiscal year?
Current fiscal year for faster safety.
We typically, I'm looking to Marissa.
Oh, okay.
Friends. I think we usually send out the allocation notices in May for the upcoming fiscal year. So I think for faster, they would have gone out in May for the current fiscal year 25.
Okay. Hopefully that helps answer part of the question.
So it sounds like it's specifically through the region. There isn't a statewide pot that would be available for catastrophic need or some need that's being.
Usually the faster safety is allocated by region. So each region has its own allocation, each of the 5.
That's yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Ron.
Just one last statement, just to tie a bow on this. I think what Dr. Cog would suggest is we would hope that this planning process would give a stronger framework around how HSIP funds are allocated to the system to have the biggest bang for the buck impact on safety improvements, because it shouldn't matter who owns the facility. We all care about just really trying to tackle this pernicious problem that is fatal and serious injury crashes on our system. And I think what you're hearing me say is that I think the perception of our local governments is the allocation of HSIP funds to specific projects has felt a little sort of insular to CDOT and focused on CDOT facilities. And I would strongly urge that we consider in this planning process a better way to make sure that we're focusing those HSIP funds on safety problems, regardless of where they occur on the transportation system.
Any other questions or comments? Safety. Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on to Jeff for our 2050 statewide plan update.
All right. We have the slides. All right. So good morning. So to refresh your memory a little bit, several months ago, I want to say probably June or July, we were before this group looking at the 2050 long-range revenue projections. And so we're kind of coming back to update that, but then to follow up with sort of the second part of the discussion, which is what we call resource allocation. And that is where we take our revenue projections and we basically make some assumptions to say, how do we think those revenues are going to be allocated to different programs or purposes over the term of the long-range plan. So long-range revenue projections are developed in advance of each statewide plan, and along with program distribution, that's the process you all go through to work through the formulas for certain programs. Those two pieces really come together to provide the financial framework for the planning process. And that includes the statewide plan, the 10-year plan, the MPO and TPR plans, the TIPS and the STIP. So this process really sort of establishes, again, for planning purposes, what are we using to plan our projects to plan our long-range plans to. So let's see here. Where am I pointing this to? There we go. All right. So again, we presented the long-range revenue forecast to you a couple of months ago. I think it was June or July. I'm going to start today's workshop by providing an update to that forecast. We have updated our forecast to include changes coming out of last legislative session, most notably the passage of Senate Bill 24-184 and Senate Bill 24-230. I'm also going to do just a general recap since it has been a few months before we get into the resource allocation part of the presentation. So this is a very high level summary of our 2050 revenue, long range revenue projections. The 2050 forecast starts out at about 2.2 billion in funding for CDOT and the enterprises in the current fiscal year. And it extends all the way out to 2050, at which point revenues are forecast to total roughly 3.5 billion. The forecast assumes current law for state revenue sources. So we assume that current fee levels, gas tax levels remain unchanged over the forecast period. So the general fund transfers we currently have in place under Senate Bill 260 extend through 2032. We don't assume that the legislature is going to extend those beyond 2032. So in all likelihood, it is very unlikely that the legislature will not touch transportation funding all the way out to 2050. But in this exercise, we do not try to assume what the legislature is going to do, how they might modify transportation funding, et cetera. We essentially assume current law. In the case of federal revenues, we have a slightly different approach. In the case of federal revenues, we assume that federal revenues will grow at about 2% annually from the current IIJA levels. While the IIJA was a pretty significant increase above historic levels, in general, what we've seen over time is that federal programs have grown about 2% on average through each authorization bill and from one to the next. So we're essentially on the federal side just going to assume that we continue to see about 2% growth in the federal program. So taken together, the forecast grows a little bit less than 2% annually over the period of the forecast. Let's go to I don't think I'm driving anything here, so let's go to the next slide. All right. So again, taken together, the forecast grows a little bit less than 2% annually over the period of the forecast. You can see that from the slide here. Most of the growth in the forecast comes from growth in federal revenue. That's the blue portion of the forecast. And enterprise revenue. That's the gray portion of the forecast. State HUTF revenue, which is the orange portion of the forecast, stays relatively flat over the forecast period. Let's see. Let's go to the next slide. I'm losing. Oh, now I am in control. All right. This is strange. All right. So this slide again shows how the composition of the forecast changes over time. So again, state HUTF declines as a share of revenues while federal revenues increase slightly. The most robust growth comes in the form of growth in revenue in the enterprises, growing from about 17% of total revenues to CDOT and the enterprises today to over 25% by 2050. As I noted, the forecast has been updated since we last presented to you to incorporate additional revenue flowing to CTIO, the Colorado Transportation Investment Office, in the form of the oil and gas production fee that was the result of Senate Bill 24-230. We also updated the forecast to include the congestion impact fee flowing to the Clean Transit Enterprise, which was the result of the passage of Senate Bill 24-184. So these two bills, Senate Bill 24-184 and Senate Bill 24-230, significantly expanded revenues flowing to CTIO and CTE respectively. The collections for the first full year of collections for the Clean Transit Enterprise, projections are about 90 to 95 million per year flowing in additional revenue flowing to the Clean Transit Enterprise as a result of that congestion impact fee. Those funds legislatively going to transit and rail activities. About 60 million in additional revenue comes from the flowing to the Clean Transit Enterprise. I'm sorry, the Colorado Transportation Investment Office, also for rail and transit purposes as a result of those bills. So again, this the forecast was updated, bringing in those two new revenue streams. The result of that was a pretty significant increase in the revenue flowing to the enterprise portion of the CDOT, combined CDOT and enterprise budget, primarily to the Clean Transit Enterprise in yellow there, and the Colorado Transportation Investment Office in red. So going to give you a little bit of some sort of a recap of some key considerations coming out of this revenue forecast before we move on to the next piece, the resource allocation piece. So again, a little bit of a recap here. Revenues are expected to grow at an average rate of about 2% through the forecast. Obviously, that is less than inflation. Inflation over the last 30 years, just general CPI is about 2.5%. I will say, as long as I've been involved in these exercises, we have never had a long-range revenue forecast that keeps up with inflation. So this is not surprising nor new. Now, that being said, despite not keeping up with inflation, the 2050 revenue forecast is 25% higher than the 2045 forecast at the same time period. And that's primarily as a result of new revenue flowing to the enterprises and increased federal funding under the IIJA. But that does not mean everything is up 25% by any means. The majority of our funding comes to us from the legislature with very specific purposes in mind. It is not all flexible. So a lot of that growth is not just flexible across our budget. But we do have, overall, looking at it from a transportation perspective, we have seen a pretty significant increase since the last time we did this exercise. Again, federal revenues are based on current law with future years forecast. We're building an assumption of 2% annual growth. State revenue inputs and assumptions are based on current law. We're not assuming any changes to those, although changes are likely. And then again, we've updated the forecast since you've last seen it to incorporate looks like we have a typo here, Senate Bill 184 and Senate Bill 230. Couple of things I want to point out. While the forecast assumes a continuation of elevated funding levels under the IIJA and historic rates of growth in federal funds, there is a very big long-term funding problem at the federal level for big surprise. The Highway Trust Fund has been insolvent for more than a decade. What that means is that the only way we've been able to keep up funding in our transportation authorization bills is because Congress has elected to backfill the trust fund with general fund. So the federal gas tax is not at all keeping up with what Congress has been appropriating through transportation authorization bills. So we are not going to opine on there. We're going to assume things just continue to grow at 2% a year, and something will happen at the federal level to address that. But I definitely want to point out that that is a big long-term structural issue with funding at the federal level. Also note that while state fuel tax and fee revenues are gradually replaced by EV fee revenue over the forecast period, the overall growth in HUTF revenue, that's our primary source of flexible state funding, is expected to slow over the forecast period. We also see off the top appropriations. Those are the appropriations taken off the top of HUTF that go to CSP and DOR. We expect that we will continue to see those grow at a rate greater than overall HUTF revenue, which obviously means the more amount we have CDOT has to allocate shrinks over time as a result of that trend. So again, the punchline here, long-term trend of increased off-the-top appropriations and slowing HUTF growth will in the long term make it increasingly difficult to maintain adequate levels of growth in operating programs that are reliant on flexible state funding and to maintain adequate levels of match for federal funds. That's my sort of I'm often referred to as a buzzkill. That's my buzzkill moment here. There's some very positive things in the forecast. I will tell you that every time we do this, it's usually a buzzkill. But again, I think the big thing I will emphasize here is that in these exercises, we do not, it's sort of the baseline exercise, opine on future legislative action. It is unlikely that nothing happens over the next 20 years. So hopefully we will see some changes at the state level and we will see some things addressed at the federal level. But what we're looking at here, that is something that will need to be addressed at some point in time.
So if you're anticipating the model to be a 2% growth increase, and yet in that other bullet that you had where you're expecting the federal funds to be negative, why are you projecting growth at all at the federal level?
So I will say the issue I'm pointing out at the federal level is not that the feds have not provided continuing growth. They have. It is just that historically, from the onset of the federal highway program, it was funded by the gas tax primarily. And the gas tax has not been increased since the early 1990s at the federal level. So obviously, if we had constrained at the federal level to gas tax, we would have a much smaller federal aid highway program. That's not what happened. Congress has continued to grow the federal aid highway program. They have just utilized general fund to do so. So so we are assuming essentially that we continue to see the same trends we have historically. I'm just pointing out the fact that long term, we will be increasingly reliant on the general fund unless Congress takes some action to address the fact that the gas tax hasn't increased since the early 90s and that the gas tax as a mechanism is on the decline. But you're right, we could have been more pessimistic and assumed something lower. But I think one of the primary purposes of this is to provide sort of a base set of assumptions for planning purposes. And so I think we also want to try to thread the needle a little bit where we don't take such a conservative approach or such a negative approach that you overly constrain your planning processes, and so I think we've struck a good balance here. Generally,
I could appreciate that, Jeff. I think where I'm going back to is looking back in what we've done previously when we've had planning level numbers where we were looking at like our 260s and things like that to keep us at the $500 million level. And now we've seen we're only going to have 250 million. How are we going back? Do we go back and reflect and say, okay, these were the planning levels that we used for these models, and it's half as much as what we're actually going to get in those future years. So how do you adjust the model to now be those current levels?
So are you referring to the 10-year plan numbers? All right, let's come back to that when we get to that part. Okay. So kind of transitioning here from the revenue forecast piece to the resource allocation piece. The resource allocation piece is where we essentially take those forecasted revenues and say, well, where do we think those revenues are going to go, right? What actual programs or categories of funding will be funded and at what level? Let's see here. I'll also note, last bullet here, that while resource allocation provides a framework for future allocation decisions in the annual budget process, we certainly look at this going forward. This is a planning exercise. This does not replace the annual budget process. We go through that process on an annual basis. That is refreshed on an annual basis. Nothing we're doing here precludes different decisions in the annual budget process. And I'll explain why that's important in a little bit further along here. Okay. So I'm going to start off before we get into the details here with a couple of key assumptions. One of the first is that we assume the state continues to appropriate funding for Senate Bill 267 debt service, limiting CDOT's share to 50 million annually. Senate Bill 267 a couple of years ago was passed with about 150 million annual in debt service. The bill was drafted suggesting, not requiring, suggesting that the state would essentially cover 2/3 of that amount. That is what has happened to date. We hope that continues to happen, because if that were to change, everything else we assume here would have to change. So that's a big fundamental consideration, is that we assume that the state will continue to appropriate 267 debt service, and CDOT's share remains as it has been since 267 passed. The second key principle, we wanted to ensure that operating programs, so that's just sort of the day-to-day basic operations, maintenance, operations, administration, that we wanted to make sure that those basic keep the door open programs are able to grow at a reasonable rate of time to the extent permitted by the availability of flexible state funds. We also wanted to make sure, recognizing the challenges we've had with pavement, the efforts we've made in the last few years to really try to make some progress on pavement and see us move up from the bottom of the list on pavement quality. We really wanted to make sure that we prioritized, to the extent we could, some amount of growth in the surface treatment program. After those things, after ensuring growth in those operating programs and service treatment program, the next thing we focused on was just simply maximizing the 10-year plan program allocations, maximizing your constraint that you could plan to for the 10-year plan. We did not grow the other flexible programs that are at the discretion of the commission to set annually. we did not look at those individually. We did not grow those. We assumed those basically remain flat. That doesn't mean that the commission can't and won't choose to increase those programs. But again, for planning purposes, we really focused on sort of prioritizing basic maintenance and operations, surface treatment, and the 10-year plan. So I'm going to walk you through the next couple of slides. This sort of is a sequential logic we go through to work to the end result of how much of our revenue is allocated to what programs on a year-by-year basis, all the way out to 2050. First of all, the majority of our programs, we don't actually have a choice. It is dedicated funding, either federal or state. All of the programs you see here have dedicated revenue sources. There's no decision point. As an example, the HSIP program, there is an HSIP funding stream that goes to the HSIP program. We don't have a choice to allocate it to pavement or something else. So the majority of our programs are a relatively easy exercise. We just simply reflect what is forecasted for that revenue source and move on. After that, the next thing we looked at is our basic maintenance program. Our maintenance program areas are MLOS. In this resource allocation, we are growing those programs at about 2.5% annually. When you get out to about 2032, we can't keep up with that growth. We have to step that growth down to about 1% annually. Now, hopefully, by the time we get to 2032, that's not what we see, and we can continue that growth, or maybe can actually grow it at a higher level. But again, that is getting into opining on future legislative action, which we're not doing here. So we simply looked at sort of based on current revenues, how much could we grow those programs? And the answer is we can grow about 2.5% in our MLOS program out to 2032 before we have to step down to about 1% annually. So that's what you'll see in this resource allocation. We essentially followed that exact same assumption for surface treatment program. So again, we grew the surface treatment program by about 2% annually through fiscal year 32 before stepping down that growth to about 1% annually in fiscal year 32. The reason for that step down, just to sort of clarify, is because in fiscal year, right now in fiscal year 25 is the first year that we have a annual general fund transfer that was put in place under Senate Bill 260 of 100 million annually. That in law, that general fund transfer ends in fiscal year 32. So the reason you see that step down is primarily because that general fund goes away beginning in 2033 based on current law. Part of it is also that the HUTF revenue growth is sort of slowing, but that's the reason why you see that step down but from fiscal year 32 to 33. So moving on, after we sort of prioritized growth in maintenance and surface treatment programs, we kind of look at the other maintenance and operating and administrative programs. We're growing at a little bit of a lower rate, about 2% annually through 32, then stepping down to 1%. From a maintenance and operations perspective, you see what programs that includes here. That's our maintenance reserve fund, our property program, capital equipment, real-time traffic operations. Again, sort of basic fundamental things. If we don't have we don't have snowplows, we can't plow the road. If we don't have buildings to house our maintenance operations and to hold STAC meetings in, we're not able to really accomplish our mission. So we again tried to put in a small amount of growth for those programs. Similarly, admin agency operations, these are sort of basic, these are largely staff salaries. So we're not going to get much done if we don't have staff. We assumed about 2% annual growth in these programs through 32, then stepped down to about 1% annually. We also grew the transportation contingency at about that same rate of growth. Couple of other items. We've got a couple of programs in our budget, debt service, express lanes, corridor maintenance and operations, which are really just payment schedules that we reflect. We have a debt service schedule and our outstanding debt. We have agreements on Central 70 and US 36 with concessionaires about how much we pay for them to operate those facilities. We build those into our resource allocation. So then you kind of get to everything else except the 10-year plan. Everything else except the 10-year plan, we have basically kept flat. Again, that does not mean that we think that those programs shouldn't go. That doesn't mean we think that they won't grow. But for the purposes of this exercise, we did not get into each of these individual programs and make assumptions about how they would grow. We kept those programs flat, and we really prioritized growing those other areas of the program, the 10-year plan, surface treatment, maintenance and operations, et cetera. But you would see sort of what are the other things that are out there that we did not build in growth factors for. So where does that leave us? Well, after you've kind of gone through all of those other steps, you kind of get to the bottom and you've got a residual surplus. That residual surplus is essentially what we're using to establish our 10-year plan constraint. So after kind of going through that whole exercise, what you have left is a rough number of about 250 million annually for the next 4-year period, fiscal year 27 to 30. When we get to the 4-year period after that, it steps down a little bit again for that same reason, because that general fund transfer goes away. So we are looking at, these are sort of our provisional constraint levels of constraint for the update of the next 10-year plan. Again, we look at the 10-year plan in 4-year windows. The current 4-year window is fiscal year 23 to 26. The next will be 27 to 30. What we call the out years, the 4 years after that would be 31 to 34. So the residual is actually a little bit higher than here, but we're trying to be a little bit conservative, recognizing that there are things we didn't increase in our assumptions, like some of those other programs, and so we kind of rounded down. But we are at this point projecting a constraint for the next 10-year plan of about 250 million a year, which would be $1 billion obviously over the 4-year period, and about 200 million for the period after that. To provide some context, the current 4-year window of 23 to 26, our constraint was 325 million a year. So stepping down a bit. Now, that is not surprising. At the time we actually updated our constraint for the last 10-year plan, we actually looked at numbers that were actually lower than this. So we're actually doing a bit better than we thought we were going to do today than we thought 4 years ago. The thing to remember about the 10-year plan to this point is that we benefited from 2 things which are no longer. One was the biggest thing was Senate Bill 267. We had over $2 billion of funding provided under debt issuances under Senate Bill 267 that are no longer there to put into our planning forecast for the next 4-year window. We also had federal stimulus money. So the 267 and the stimulus got us to a higher level of constraint in the earlier bands of the 10-year plan. So this is a bit of a step down from about 1.3 billion over the next 4-year window to about 1 billion over the next 4-year window. Going to kind of wrap up here. Everything I walked through is really the CDOT portion of resource allocation. We also have the enterprises, and I have to count. Let's see, I think we have 5 enterprises now. We did a similar exercise for each of the allocations to the enterprise. Again, we kind of went through a very similar approach where we built in sort of the revenue sources, payment schedules. We grew sort of operating and admin programs about 2% a year, and then we sort of allocated everything else to sort of their core programs, projects and grants programs. So not going to go through those 8 steps again, but we essentially followed a very similar process for those enterprise allocations. And going back to the 10-year plan, I think it's important to note that when we're talking about the 10-year plan constraint, we are not talking about any of the enterprise dollars, and we're not talking about federal grants. Those are all in addition to. So the reality is, when we talk about $1 billion to the 10-year plan over the next 4 years, it is inevitably a lot more than $1 billion going to those projects. Again, this is just looking at sort of the revenue sources that we plan, that the TPRs work with regions to plan towards those projects. But you bring a lot of additional dollars to bear through the bridge and tunnel enterprise, through CTIO or HPTE in some cases, if there's managed lanes, through discretionary grants, et cetera. All right, so I'm going to wrap up here.
What's the future enterprise? Because it shows it goes away in 2031.
Yep, and I'll let Darius take that.
Absolutely. It was created with Senate Bill 23-280. It is only allowed to collect $15 million a year. It gives $10 million out to certain municipalities and counties. I believe Adams County, Aurora, Otero County, El Paso County, and Grand County per statute. Then there's $5 million to go for projects for freight, statewide projects related to freight, in particular with the movement of fuel. It is supposed to sunset in 2030 because that's what it says in the legislation.
So, I'll wrap up real quick and then we'll open it up to any questions or comments. So kind of where are we at? We just went through this with the Transportation Commission at their meeting a couple of weeks ago. We are now moving on from this excerpt. What we will do now next is take this resource allocation, which again is sort of the program level allocations out all the way out to 2050. We work, Division of Accounting and Finance works with DTD to essentially take that information and allocate it down to the region and MPO level so that you have sort of planning level estimates to work with for MPO plans, for TPR plans, TIPs, STIPs, et cetera. So that's our next step, is to essentially take these statewide numbers, to use the formulas from program distribution as well as other assumptions, and to sort of allocate that down to numbers at the region level and the MPO level that can be used for planning purposes. So that'll be our next step. We'll be working on that over the next month or two. The other thing I want to add as just a final comment is this is a point in time. And while generally we try to avoid, updating this, right? We don't want you to go start your planning process and then come back every quarter and be like, wait, hold on, update this. That is whether we come back to this is all subject to sort of what happens at the state level, what happens at the federal level. And if there are notable changes coming out of the legislative session, subsequent legislative sessions, we absolutely do come back and revisit some of the assumptions if necessary. So when we're talking about the level of constraint for the 10-year plan in particular, it is a point in time estimate. It's what we'll move forward with today. But we'll be monitoring funding discussions at the state and federal level closely. And if something notable were to change to the good or to the not good, then we would come back and we would revisit some of those assumptions. So with that, I think I'll wrap up, and I'm happy to take any questions or comments you all might have.
I have a question for you, Jeff. Thanks for this information. Going back to the EV fees and the HUTF fundings, the fee is not a tax passed by the voters; it's a fee passed on to the owner. What is the alternate of funding mechanism going to be put in place for and the enticement of more folks going EV and the loss of revenue for the HUTF and the gas taxes? What's CDOT's plan? And for number one, to offset that, the legislative or otherwise, and number two, how is that going to entice, if it's a fee for those in the rural setting or even in the urban setting, to go EV?
So Senate Bill 260. So to answer the question first about the offset, Senate Bill 260 largely, at least for the time being, addressed that issue. So when Senate Bill 260 passed, it increased EV fees. It spread that increase out all the way to 2032. So it steps up over time. But that increased EV fee was designed to, on average, be essentially equivalent to what you would pay in state gas tax if you were driving an average fuel economy vehicle, an average number of miles. So the structure put in place with EV fees under 260 was designed to be essentially net neutral with the decline in the state gas tax. Now, whether that is the construct that remains in place in perpetuity, I'd say maybe not. I think discussions at the federal level in a lot of states about a post gas tax tend to look more at things like a mileage-based fee or something that's more variable with how much you drive. So, but I think Senate Bill 260 at least put something in place with the increased fees to at least deal with that now. It might not be the optimal long-term solution, but it is intended to essentially be revenue neutral.
Jeff, number 8, back on your slides, showing the 10-year plan continued information. Yeah.
Right here. Okay.
I'm curious on why, with as we've been talking about the 2050 plan, everything we've been targeting and identifying has been safety, asset management, mobility. Oh, you did change it. Look at you. You did change it.
I think I know where your comment was going with this.
Yeah.
We had an error on this slide, which is, let me explain this here. In the last 10-year plan, there were a couple of sort of allocation principles. One of the principles was that at least 10% was going to go to transit and multimodal, and at least 50% of the rest was going to go to asset management. So what we're reflecting here is basically just we're using that guiding principle to say in our budget we sort of divide the 10-year plan dollars among those three categories, and so that is all we're reflecting here. We're saying, okay, if we continue that same framework, 10% would go to transit and multimodal. Of the rest, half would go to asset management, half would go to sort of everything else, which is sort of what we mean by the mobility nomenclature. I think there was an earlier version of this slide that said capital instead of asset management, which was a bit confusing, but it was supposed to say asset management.
Okay, well then going on from that, when you're looking at now fiscal year 30, 250 million, we're not really in a 10-year plan. I mean, so we don't have the revenues to really do a 10-year plan in 10 years. We haven't, I mean, essentially that's not what when we started the 10-year plan, it was to actually complete the projects in 10 years. And so I think as part of our 2050, then we're going to be going back and looking at what projects have been completed, which ones are still outstanding. You know, 260, with my understanding, was to get us to the 10-year plan is completing the projects on the list in that 10-year timeframe. So how are we looking at if we're going to continue to call this a 10-year plan and not a 15-year plan or a 20-year plan?
Well, I think
the revenues we need to actually accomplish those projects on the list.
Well, and I think Darius can jump in on this as well. I think the nomenclature 10-year, I think, was always probably has at different points probably caused at different points some confusion. The thing that's important to remember is that the 10-year plan was never fully constrained to revenue. It started out as essentially, in fact, before the 10-year plan, we had what was called the 10-year development program. But the 10-year plan started out as a completely unconstrained exercise. And so what we have done since that point is we have looked 4 years at a time at how much we could fund, and then we have sort of retained everything else in what we've called the out years. And so as we move forward, less and less of that original list is left in the out years. But I don't think I don't think the expectation under Senate Bill 260 was ever that it was going to fully fund the 10-year plan in 10 years, because that was really never reasonably constrained to sort of anticipated revenues in the first place. So I think that we've come a long way in the first 10-year plan period. But I think the next part of the exercise is looking at the remaining projects out there in the out years, constraining and then potentially starting to add some projects in the years beyond that. But I think that's important to remember, is that the entire universe of the 10-year plan was never fully constrained.
Couple questions, just for confirmation on the general fund transfer for the debt. That's number 6, right? Am I reading that correctly? Then what, the over $50 million that we're paying off? I'm trying to make sure we're confirming that we're actually paying off the debt.
We most certainly are. So the Senate Bill 267 has about 150 million a year in debt service extending through 2041. The state CDOT pays the 50 million of that amount. The legislature annually appropriates 100 million of that amount, and that is what has happened to this point. Hopefully, will continue to happen.
And what happens if they don't?
If that becomes an issue, then we would likely be in a situation where we would have to backfill that amount, and it would mean, and that's kind of why I pointed that out as one of the most basic assumptions here. It would mean us redirecting funds from the 10-year plan and other capital construction programs. So it would not be a very good scenario. So hopefully that doesn't happen.
And how do we encourage that to never happen?
Um,
I mean, I get it. I mean, it's politics, right? But the
Yeah.
bottom line is, this is something that could be a detriment to all of the people sitting in this room, in the sense that we will lose everything to pay down the debt service.
Sure. I mean, I can tell you this has been in place since 2017. It's to a certain extent, hasn't been an issue, to this point. We've had, in fact, Senate Bill 260 actually went so far as to, actually appropriate some additional funds for us that we're still drawing down to help us cover some of even that 50 million. But like anything, a legislature can make different decisions. They could choose to eliminate the 100 million general fund transfer tomorrow. They could choose to make changes to any of our other revenue streams. So, we point that out as a basic assumption because it is one of the basic assumptions, but I don't want to suggest that it is something we think likely to happen any more than any number of other things could happen through the legislative funding process.
Okay, my second question is about your slide, bullet 8. I'm struggling with the 10% transit and multimodal, mostly because doesn't transit already get a windfall from another chunk of money in another spot? And now we're doing another 10%. I feel as though it seems like transit, we're taking money from every bucket. And it feels as though transit's getting richer and nobody else is.
So, and I think Darius can feel free to jump in on this as well, but I would say, when you get to the sort of the 10-year plan portion of the planning process, I think you'll probably be having discussions about what assumptions you had last time and whether those assumptions still make sense. I would just say that this is sort of following that rather than driving that. So if through the 10-year planning process, the decision is to change any of those basic assumptions, we would reflect those changes on this end. And Darius, I don't know if there's anything you want to comment about process timing wise about sort of.
No, I think the process.
10-year plan assumptions.
Oh, sorry, Jeff, I didn't mean to talk over you. No, I think that's about right. I think the process time wise is probably taking a look at the spring timeframe once we are kind of through most of the TPR meetings in order to take a look at the process. Also note that a lot of this was based off of 267 funds, which had a requirement that 10% go to transit multimodal. That's correct.
That's exactly right. I think that original 10% in the last 10-year plan was tied to the 267 requirement, and we just simply made the decision to say, let's apply that to the whole 10-year plan, all the funds. But again, this is reflecting assumptions from the last 10-year plan, not suggesting that we've locked in assumptions for the next 4-year period.
So if I'm hearing both of you correctly, then it's going to be up to the individual TPR MPO to prioritize if they want to keep those assumptions in those allocations? Or is it going to be up to the state? That's where I'm trying to navigate how we're going through the planning process with our own individual communities to say, hey, by the way, we have to stick to these percentages, or we can do this in a, a la carte basis, depending on each TPR and MPO.
It's a good question. I don't have an answer for you currently. I think overall for the 10-year plan, it is a state decision, but in terms of planning for the TPRs, that's something that we can take a look at and get guidance as we go through these meetings.
Yeah, so that's where the stick is, right? So we're all trying to figure out our prioritization lists. Currently, we're going to be on 2 next week, but we'd like to know, hey, is this a decision that we get to make, or is this a decision you get to make? And it's hard to say, wait till May when we're ready to start making these decisions now. I've got an entire region who is just waiting to pull out that list and say, I want this at the top. And if I have to wait till May, what's the point of having all these meetings?
Point taken.
Ron. Thank you very much, Jeff. Thanks as always. This is really good. I'm going to miss you, Heather. Well, I wasn't going to speak to kind of the point that Heather raised, but I feel like I should. I think, one, it's important to point out that that 10% target is transit and multimodal. I would say every corner of the state can benefit from some dedicated investments in multimodal improvements, whether it's transit is the right solution or something else. And often those something else's for multimodal bicycle and pedestrian improvements have a significant safety impact, that they're an important part of addressing a significant part of our fatal and serious injury crashes occurring on our systems across the state. So I think there's flexibility for every TPR, every MPO to work with CDOT and their regions about how best to invest those funds. And it's 10% of less than 10% of the entire state transportation budget. So it's essentially 1% of funds that are they're asking us to focus a little bit on some of that. Which leads me to sort of my bigger point. It occurs to me, the first, and I don't want to, this will sound by speaking sacrilege here a little bit to CDOT, and I don't mean to diminish the importance of the 10-year plan. At the same time, I think the original 10-year plan was developed as a way to advocate with this state legislature and other partners for more funding to address really critical needs across the state. And now that Senate Bill 267 and Senate Bill 260 have been enacted, is the 10-year plan still serving a similar purpose? And it seems like its importance is getting a little bit diminished because it is now, like, it represents with these allocations about 10% of the entire state transportation budget. And is it really being strategic? And are we losing opportunities, understanding the politics of why all these enterprises have been created? But these special enterprises now are representing more investment in total in the transportation system than the 10-year plan allocation. And that's only going to increase over time. And how do we, as interested parties in this process, make sure that we're looking strategically across all of the funding sources that are available to invest if we're only focused on sort of 10% through the 10-year plan piece, rather than the additional, I don't know what, 350 million or more across the enterprises? And should at least STAC get some updates from those various enterprises about their strategic plans, how those investment decisions are being made, so that we can think about those in the context of the decisions we'll make together in the 10-year plan.
Good point.
And just to push back a little, I get where you're saying about the multimodal and all of this is safety regulated, but here's my thought. Northwest TPR would much rather take that 1% of the, whatever, and put it toward maintenance. I mean, the bottom line is our concern and issue is always going to be maintenance and that level of service. So that's completely part of the safety issue. We're having issues with just that. So that's why I'm looking at it from a local perspective, saying, if this is a choice that we can a la carte, we more than likely would allocate it, even though we'd love our multimodal money, we'd probably allocate it more on the safety and maintenance part. So.
I just have a question on that. Is that 10%, I can't remember, did you say it's required by statute to be?
No. When we first started the 10-year plan, the primary source of funding for the 10-year plan was Senate Bill 267. Senate Bill 267 had a requirement that at least 10% be spent on transit and multimodal. So that sort of is the origin of the 10%. And then I think as additional funding sources were brought in, we maintained that same 10% target, even though it was no longer tied to the Senate Bill 267 requirement.
So if the rural TPRs are going to be required to spend the 10% on that, and this probably wouldn't fly very well with Senator Winter, is my guess, would it be possible to amend that little portion so that a rural TPR based upon your population, certain population amounts would be able to instead divert their money to pavement maintenance?
Or does the enterprise fund money count as our 10%?
Well,
yeah, or something so that they can get more money. I'm not saying that, yeah, we need more, I got chewed out by someone about not wanting more transit in El Paso County. So a big county like us will find the 10%, but a little area like the Northwest TPR if they had the flexibility, that would really help them.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Darius, but I think that the 10% was a target and it was a statewide target as opposed to every single individual TPR. So I think that provides a lot of flexibility where you're going to have certain areas of the state where they're going to blow right by that target because that's their priority, and other areas that don't. But overall, that was sort of a policy target to say, overall, we hope, like, again, in the last 10-year plan cycle, overall, that was the target statewide. Is that accurate, Darius?
Correct.
So maybe there is a way for the more metro areas. Can't believe I'm speaking on behalf of transit here, to somehow take the greater responsibility to meet that 10% so that Lincoln County and Northwest and Montezuma, the very Cortez County isn't building a bike lane to meet their 10%. And although a lot of people in Cortez would probably use it, I suspect. So.
Steve.
So I'm listening, and I think part of the thing that I'm kind of questioning is, rather than us focusing on how much control and influence we have on our own little buckets or pies, the bigger piece here is how much influence can folks have in participation in those enterprises? Because those enterprises are becoming bigger buckets. And if we want to have influence on where the money flows, we could talk about our own little individual pieces all day long, but what really the question is how do we play in the realm of having influence on those enterprises? Like what do we need to do to make sure that as we've created this other set of governance where those enterprises are going to be governed and choices are made outside of these other structures, it feels like it's almost created a separate process, separate group of decision makers.
Yeah, and I think one thing I would note, I think in the case of Bridge and Tunnel Enterprise and CTIO, the 10-year plan, I think, remained the primary driving driver. So what I mean by that is, in the case of Bridge and Tunnel Enterprise, you all prioritized your 10-year plan projects, and many of those 10-year plan projects included Bridge Enterprise eligible elements, which led to Bridge Enterprise essentially funding those elements. So I think in the case of Bridge and Tunnel and CTIO, at least in the last 10-year plan cycle, there was a very tight tie between what you planned in the 10-year plan and it's sort of the funding sort of followed those 10-year plan priorities. I think in the case of, you're right, in the case of some of the newer enterprises, some of the transit and rail, I think, I think there's a need to continue to try to coordinate, planning efforts as we move forward. And I think we've, that's been a factor, I think, for the last several years, that we've seen more need to try to integrate transit and rail and other planning with our traditional TPR planning processes.
I hear what you're saying. That's kind of an assessment and an observation. What do we need to do to make that be fulfilled? Because it makes sense that if you already have structures and checks and balances and engagement structures in place for these other areas, what we're worried about, I think, is having like a whole new set of outside rules and processes that don't make sense. You just kind of mentioned that those older ones, those prior ones, have been successful in ensuring consistency, both in process and substance. How can we encourage that for these newer enterprises?
Go ahead, Dennis.
So I do want to mention that I think it's 280, but if I got the bill number wrong, please excuse me, that the CTIO fee, I think it's the rental car fee, congestion fee, there is a provision for it to be in alignment with the 10-year plan and with the GHG planning standards. So I wanted to mention that up front. And as far as to answer your question, Commissioner, about how to get involved, they're all publicly available meetings in order to help, provide comment. A couple of them are the Transportation Commission serves as the board of directors, the Fuels Impact Enterprise, and the Bridge Enterprise, almost got that incorrect. And a couple of the other enterprises, as we had conversations, the funding is limited on specific areas. The non-attainment enterprise, most of the state can't apply for those. Those are only available in Denver and North Front Range in the ozone non-attainment areas, and the Fuels Impact Enterprise has a limited scope.
And I think most of the enterprises, if not all of the enterprises, have a 10-year plan requirement, that there is a 10-year plan process that they go through themselves. So I think the point, to Darius's point, I think those are meetings of the enterprise that folks are welcome to participate in and provide feedback on. But there is, I think most of them have like a 10-year plan requirement to develop a 10-year plan.
But that would mean that you're having separate 10-year plans is the question. And so my question is, like the CTIO, like you mentioned, is consistent or congruent, or at least feeds into the 10-year plan. Now we're going to have these separate potential plans that are not going to all be consistent or compatible potentially. And I guess that's my question is how do we encourage? Do we need to ask the legislature to put in a similar type of provision that you just mentioned and cited for the CTIO? Or like, how do we, other than, yeah, open meeting, come on, show up, you get 3 minutes at the beginning.
How is the state collectively taking the evaluation of all of these plans and representing what are true needs and true what we're going to get, so that we can make sure these percentages that we need to plan for are actually, we're not duplicating efforts and we're actually accommodating the statewide perspective, I think is really the biggest concern, and how you guys are going to be tackling how can you come and make a recommendation to us on these are the percentages when you don't even know what all the other enterprises are identifying for their projects for their 10-year plans from a statewide perspective?
I guess what I would say is I don't have a perfect answer for you, but I would say that there are the statewide transportation plan and the regional transportation plans. You are able to look in those plans at transportation needs at large. And in fact, I think typically, I'm looking around like as an example for the Dr. Cog plan. In the Dr. Cog plan, there are assumptions about bridge and tunnel enterprise funding, and there are assumptions at different points in time about CTIO funding. So there is the ability to sort of look at transportation needs across the state within your plan. Now, it is a unique feature of transportation in Colorado that we have the enterprise structures that we do. They are not completely synonymous entities, and so it creates some challenges.
Maybe something we need to invite the Clean Transit Enterprise Board and some of those to kind of interact with us in the future, just so we can try to develop some dialogue with them. So I think that'd be something we could do.
Yeah, I think I would just request, at least for the transit 10-year plan, more transparency in the process. I don't think there's a lot of transit people here, but yeah, more transparency and maybe data driven. And I would say actually like looking at the capital a lot are in rural areas because of all the ski towns transit systems. So it's not necessarily like a rural urban divide, but I think more evaluation of those projects and a transparent process, I think would be welcome.
Any other questions, comments on this one?
You guys do a great job. I think what makes this hard with the enterprises is that it's harder to tell the story of the need for transportation from a statewide perspective. And the legislature, they'll have the enterprises in their mind going, we just passed this bill with all this funding. And so we can't, so to me, it feels like there could be a disconnect from our legislators to what your story is from a CDOT perspective of really telling the needs still that we have for transportation. And that's all I was trying to say, Jeff.
I have one more comment too. So I recall last time when we did the 10-year plan, it was about naming the pig and putting kind of what we wanted, not just what we had. Is that the path that is planned? I know this is just projections, like this is what we have, but as we go to the 10-year plan, are we going to kind of do, also more like visioning of where we would like to be, not just like the minimum funding we think we could have?
So I think to answer that particular question, the 10-year plan is kind of more from the development program into something that's more fiscally constrained based off of legislation. I mean, we have the reporting pieces of it, the standard in our planning rules are required on it. If we don't have a 10-year plan, a fiscally constrained 10-year plan, then the rules don't work. So we have to continue that. So that's what the focus is on in the 10 years, but we also have the opportunity to refresh it every 4 years because of funding uncertainty. And that's why we have like the out year pieces, the last 2 years kind of turn into a new 4-year prioritized list of projects to align with the STEP cycle. So I know that doesn't answer your question, but hopefully that kind of gives some context.
Yeah, I think that the planning process, part of it is visioning on where we would like to see the system by that 2050. But then we also have to pull everybody back to the fiscally constrained, what we can get done right now and what we would like to see. So I think sort of the planning plays a big part to help hopefully eventually get the legislature to help us meet those goals. I would like to thank you for at least looking at the stepped up increases for maintenance and those things. I'd still like to see that at a bigger number myself, but I think a lot of us would, but at least it's acknowledging we have to at least try to keep up with that inflationary, even though we know the funding is not fully coming in to do that, but thank you. Right. Anything else on that? Any other business?
Thanks.
Jeff. Curious. Anything else to come up? Our next meeting scheduled November 7th by Zoom, correct? Yep.
Chair.
Okay. Do you have a feel for, do we want to keep them at 8:30? Is that working well for people? Keep staying at 8:30 meetings? Okay, we'll plan on, I think Zoom's especially easier for that. All right. If not, we're adjourned till November 7th. Thank you. We're 10 minutes now.